Truth be told, many students are unsure how to write a thesis statement for a literature essay, especially because it often feels like what worked in other classes suddenly doesn't work here. If that's you, don't worry. That confusion is actually extremely common, and it's one of the main reasons students struggle with literary analysis even when they understand the text. What makes this frustrating is that you're usually not starting from nothing. You've read the story or poem carefully. You've noticed patterns. You've underlined passages, and you have ideas. And yet, when it's time to write the thesis statement, the sentence often feels unstable, and the essay itself doesn't seem to have any real direction. In this video, I'm going to be very direct about what a literary thesis statement is, how it differs from other thesis statements you've probably written before, and how to write one that actually helps you rather than making the writing harder. If you're new here, my name is Dr. Whitney Kosters. I am a professor of English, and I have been teaching literature and writing for over 20 years. And this channel is designed to help make the confusing parts about literature and writing simpler for you, so be sure to subscribe. I'm making this video because the thesis statement is the most important part of a literature essay, and when it's doing the wrong kind of work, everything else in the paper becomes more difficult than it needs to be. A literary thesis statement is not just a sentence you include because the assignment asks for one. It's the controlling idea of your entire essay, as it decides what your essay is going to explain, what passages you'll focus on, and how your analysis will be organized. If the thesis statement is unclear, your essay will be unclear. If it's unfocused, your essay will suffer. So let's get very clear about what a literary thesis statement actually is. It is a debatable claim about how a text works, not what a text is about. It explains what the text is doing and how it creates meaning. Now, this is where a lot of students get stuck because they bring in a definition of a thesis statement that worked perfectly well in other classes. But in those contexts, a thesis statement often announces a topic, states an opinion, or previews a point. What most students don't understand is that in literature, that just simply isn't enough. If your thesis statement only summarizes the plot, names a theme, or describes a character, your essay will end up retelling the text rather than analyzing it, and that's the last thing you want. And if you do need help avoiding summary and focusing on analysis, I've got an entire video dedicated to that, so be sure to check that out. So here is a clear way to think about what a strong literary thesis statement needs to do every time. First, it names the text being analyzed. Second, it makes a debatable claim about how that text works. And third, it points toward the main patterns the essay will analyze in order to support that claim. When one of these pieces is missing, the writing will definitely lose focus and direction. You should think about it like this. The essay summarizes the story, pulls in quotes, and comments on moments that seem important, but it never explains how those moments connect or what the essay is ultimately trying to show. Nothing sounds obviously wrong, but nothing feels settled either because the essay hasn't yet decided what it is responsible for explaining. So when I say that the claim has to be debatable, you should keep in mind that debatable doesn't mean shocking, extreme, or controversial. It means that reasonable readers could disagree with your interpretation while still using the same text. Literature is art. It is meant to be interpreted, argued over, and discussed. There is no single correct answer that everyone is supposed to arrive at, and that is exactly why we write these literary essays in the first place. When you write a literary thesis statement, you're not trying to guess what the author secretly meant or what your instructor wants to hear. You are making a case for how you see the text working, and your job is to support that reading clearly and convincingly. If your thesis statement is something almost everyone would immediately agree with, then there's nothing for the essay to do. For instance, saying that a story is about loss, identity, or growing up is often true, but it's not yet a literary thesis statement because those ideas don't explain how the text creates meaning. A debatable literary thesis statement explains how the text constructs those ideas and why that construction matters. So I'm going to make this concrete with an example. James Joyce's short story Araby is often described as being about disappointment or loss of innocence. Now that observation isn't wrong, but it's not a thesis statement yet. It tells us what happens emotionally, but it doesn't explain how Joyce builds that experience. So, a stronger literary thesis statement might argue that in Araby, the narrator transforms ordinary desire into a form of devotion, and that Joyce develops this transformation through religious imagery, repeated contrast between light and darkness, and a structure that steadily moves toward recognition. Now, notice what that sentence does. It names the text, it makes a claim about how the story works, and it gives the essay clear direction. Each part of the thesis statement points toward a kind of analysis the essay needs to do. Now let's look at a second example so that you can see how this approach works across different texts. Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper is often summarized as a story about a woman who goes mad. Again, that's not wrong, but it's not analysis. A literary thesis statement begins when the sentence explains how the story creates that breakdown. For example, a strong thesis statement might argue that in The Yellow Wallpaper, the narrator's mental deterioration is produced by enforced isolation and the systematic dismissal of her voice, a process Gilman develops through the confined setting, the progression of the wallpaper imagery, and the shift in the narrator's language over time. Now, that claim is debatable because someone else could argue that the story focuses more on medical authority or marriage or gendered power using the same text. And that's exactly what makes it a strong thesis. Keep in mind that the same kind of attention applies whether the text is a short story, a poem, or a novel, because the work a literary thesis statement performs remains consistent even as the material changes. Now, if you want a practical way to draft a literary thesis statement before polishing the language, here is a sentence frame you can use every time. In this text, the author uses a particular pattern or technique to do something specific, and that matters because it shapes how the text should be understood. Now, you're not meant to submit that sentence exactly as written. Think of it as a drafting tool. It helps you see whether you actually have an argument and whether your essay knows what it's responsible for explaining. So how do you actually move toward a thesis statement like this when you're feeling stuck? Well, you can start by looking for patterns rather than themes. You can ask yourself, what keeps showing up in the text? What kinds of images repeat? What situations recur? What changes over time? Those patterns usually point towards something the text is doing deliberately. Once you notice a pattern, ask what that pattern allows the text to show or argue, because that question is going to move you out of summary and into interpretation. Now, here's a simple way to test whether your thesis is ready before writing the full essay. Try outlining your body paragraphs directly from the thesis. If each part of the thesis clearly points to a section of the essay, and if you can already think of more than one passage to support each part, your thesis statement is probably doing its job. If the thesis feels so broad that almost any quote could fit under it, or so narrow that you could run out of evidence too quickly, it needs revision. And lastly, remember that a thesis statement isn't permanent. It can always change as you write. The important thing is that whatever your thesis statement says, the essay must explain it, and everything in the essay must connect back to it. If you find it's not working for you, don't force it, just revise it. If this video helped clarify how literary thesis statements work, please know that I have many more videos on my channel that break down literary analysis and academic writing in the same clear, practical way, including full analyses on works like Araby, The Yellow Wallpaper, and many other commonly taught texts. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future videos, and feel free to explore the channel for help with writing, interpretation, and close reading. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Be well.